Welcome to the Parsha Perspective. Each week, we will delve deep in a weekly Torah portion to find a practical and insightful way to enhance your daily life. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Rabbi Shalom Yamini, and each week we will look into the weekly Torah portion to find practical and insightful ways to enhance your daily life. This week's Parsha Perspective is in honor of our homeland, Eretz Yisrael. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu, may God continue to protect our brave soldiers, and may He comfort all those who are grieving and give healing to our nation. This week's Parsha Perspective is in loving memory of Edward ben Ephraim, Shlomo ben Edward, and Yerachmiel Daniel ben Gedalia. May their souls be uplifted, and may their memories be a blessing. This week's Parsha Perspective is in honor of the Refuah Shalema of Binyamin ben Tova, Raphael ben Mazal, and Orna Bastili, and may they merit a complete and speedy recovery. Before I begin, today, the 4th of Shvat, marks the yahrzeit, the anniversary of passing of Rav Yisrael Abu Chatzera, known as the Baba Sali. A gigantic scholar and a renowned Kabbalist, he devoted his life to helping others through wisdom, compassion, and spiritual depth. Born in Morocco in 1890, he moved to Israel in 1964 and settled in Netivot, where he returned his holy soul to his Maker on the 4th of Shvat in 1984. And he was laid to rest in Netivot, and may his memory be a blessing for all the Jewish people as we come close and we achieve the ultimate redemption and the coming of Mashiach. This week's Torah portion is Parshas Bo, guarding our freedom. Our Parsha recounts the final 3 makas, the final 3 plagues that God brought upon the Egyptian nation for enslaving the Jewish people. The first was the plague of locusts. Massive swarms descended upon the land, consuming every remaining crop and blade of vegetation until nothing green remained. Egyptian was left stripped and lifeless. Pare, shaken by devastation, summoned Moshe Rabbeinu and pleaded for the plague to end. Yet once again, when the locust disappeared, his resolve hardened, and he refused to release the Jewish people. God then brought a plague of complete darkness, choshech, on the entire land of Egypt. And for 3 days the Egyptians were unable to see, followed by 3 additional days when darkness became so heavy that they could not move at all. And it was a darkness that imprisoned them from within their own homes, cutting them off from life itself. After the plagues of locusts and darkness, Pare summoned Moshe Rabbeinu once more with a new condition. He agreed to let the Jewish people go, but demanded that their livestock remain behind. Moshe Rabbeinu refused, declaring that not a single animal would be left behind, for this was not an escape, but a complete redemption. Enraged, Pare expelled Moshe Rabbeinu and warned him to never appear before him again, for he would be killed. Then came the final and most devastating makkah, the most devastating plague, the death of all Egyptian firstborn, Makas Becharis. At midnight, a wave of death swept through Egypt without exception. And the cries of mourning filled the land as Pare himself, a firstborn, ran to Moshe Rabbeinu and ordered the Jewish people to leave Egypt immediately. The Jewish people gathered their belongings and accepted the wealth freely handed to them by the Egyptians, and on the 15th of Nisan, in broad daylight, they departed as a free nation, beginning a journey that would change the course of history. However, a question comes to mind. Moshe Rabbeinu gives the newly freed Jewish people many commandments that were commanded by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. One of them is recounting our Yetzias Mitzrayim, our exodus of Egypt, remembering it and telling our children. And the Torah repeats the mitzvah of telling our children the Yetzias Mitzrayim 3 separate times. In one pasuk, the Torah says that the child asks and receives an answer. In the other one, the parent speaks without being prompted and frames the story personally. And the third time it's repeated, the response emphasizes force, strength, and the release from slavery. And these are not repetitions of a language, but an entirely different way of telling the exact same story. Why does the Torah insist on retelling the Yetzias Mitzrayim 3 separate times? What does each way of telling teach us by being so deliberately different? Rashi, Rav Shlomo Yitzchaki, the leading Torah commentary, gives a simple explanation. And he writes that the Torah repeats the mitzvah of recounting the Yetzias Mitzrayim because children do not ask questions the same way. Each pasuk addresses a different kind of child, shaped by their education, their curiosity, and their maturity. One child asks directly and demands clarity, while the other listens quietly and needs the story initiated for him. According to Rashi, the Torah is not repeating itself, but teaching us how to respond. And the chiyuv, the obligation of this mitzvah, is not only to tell the story, but to tell it correctly. Each child must hear the Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus of Egypt, in a way that speaks to who they are at that moment. The mitzvah is one, but the expression shifts with the listener, ensuring that the story of our foundation, of our exodus from Egypt, is truly received. However, the Netziv, Rav Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, a famous Torah commentary, gives us a deeper and more profound explanation. And he writes that the Torah repeats the mitzvah of sharing the story of our exodus from Egypt, because freedom is not a stable condition. Redemption, a goal once achieved, does not automatically endure. Without constant reinforcement, even the most dramatic liberation can quietly unravel. The Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus, therefore must be retold not for memory alone, but for preservation. According to the Netziv, each mitzvah of retelling the story strengthens a different layer of our national resilience. One repetition of telling the story grounds the historical awareness, and while the other personalizes the experience of freedom. And the final repetition of telling the story emphasizes strength, force, and reminding us what it took for the Jewish nation to leave Egypt. Together, these repetitions form a system of reinforcement that ensuring that redemption, our Yetzias Mitzrayim, doesn't fade under pressure. Moshe Rabbeinu is not only concerned with leaving Egypt, but with remaining free afterwards. Freedom that is remembered once can be admired, but freedom that is rehearsed many times becomes permanent. And by commanding us with multiple retellings of the story, the Torah teaches that the nation is to protect its identity before it's tested, long before the freedom of the nation is ever threatened. And that is why the Torah insists, and Moshe Rabbeinu pushes and repeats the telling of the story before the celebration itself. A newly freed people cannot rely on emotion alone to sustain their freedom. They must be trained to carry the freedom deliberately. And with discipline and thoughtfulness, their redemption becomes identity, and their identity is what survives the pressure. This profound lesson from the Holy Netziv is ever more relevant since October 7th, 2023. We have been reminded that freedom is sustained through awareness and focus, not through assumption. And when spiritual alertness dulls, our identity becomes vulnerable. Our direction forward begins to blur because memory alone cannot safeguard purpose without the constant engagement. And in times of pressure like our circumstances today, clarity itself becomes the avodah, the work of a Jew. For we are required not only to guard our physical safety, but to guard our spiritual orientation, to make sure that our inner truth is real. Competing narratives test resolve, and they quietly reshape our values if left unexamined. Redemption advances when freedom is treated as a responsibility, not a given. And until our geula, our redemption is here, our freedom remains fragile and unfinished. In our daily life, it is imperative to realize that success is not self-sustaining. Momentum fades when attention weakens, and progress stalls when responsibility is assumed rather than practice. Growth requires awareness, especially in moments that feel routine or secure. The most meaningful achievements are preserved not by talent alone, but by engagement and deliberate effort. Pressure reveals whether progress was internalized or just inherited. And those that remain attentive to shifting conditions, to the competing narratives, and to the subtle drift are better equipped to endure challenge. Strength built during stability is what carries people through uncertainty. And when responsibility is treated as an active action rather than assumed, individuals continue forward, achieving far beyond what they once thought possible. There's a profound quote that I once read. The tragedy of the modern man is not that he knows less, but that he cares less. Have a great weekend and good Shabbos. Thank you for tuning in to the Parsha Perspective. Check out our website, theparshaperspective.com. Send thoughts and comments to theparshaperspective@gmail.com. Till next time, thanks for listening.